All right guys, part two. We are in the gym now. We're gonna go through my entire warm up from start to finish. And I'm gonna show you some of the tools and some of the things that I do to make sure that I'm prepared and ready for my training session. So let's take a look at the physical side. I'm gonna walk through everything that I do to warm up, and hopefully you guys can find some use in this video. But before we get started, I wanted to show you guys what I have in my gym bag, what I take with me to the gym on a day-to-day basis, and some of the tools that I'd recommend that you guys bring as well. Let's jump into it. Okay, so whether I'm coming into the gymnastics center or if I'm training, there's a couple things that I keep in my bag pretty well at all times. Number one, let's open this up. Little puzzle. This is great. I love playing with this. We're gonna see how quickly we can do it. Bungees. Biggest thing that I keep in my bag at all times is bungees. Typically, I'm doing some sort of stimulation or some type of mobility work that involves using bungees, so those live in my bag at all times. If I'm traveling, I always bring these with me. There's little ticks on the inside of this, which is the first key. Oh, there it is, found it. Okay, let's go. So you gotta follow the ticks through the little maze to solve the maze, but it doesn't stop there. It keeps going. You gotta be on the ball. Lacrosse ball, and this is for doing soft tissue work. That is one of the things that I typically do first in my training session, which we'll cover today, but this guy is really good. I don't use it that often when I'm in the gym. I try to use some other implements, which I'll show you, but when I'm traveling, really good because it's really small, and if you really wanna dig into your tissues and open yourself up, great tool for it. I don't know if I'm gonna be breaking 30 seconds today. Shoot. And then I usually carry some floss bands with me as well. So if I ever roll my ankle or have some injury or some issue that's holding me back, maybe my wrists are sore, the shoulder is sore, any joint problems for the most part, wrap it up with one of these things for a couple minutes and you'll feel like $1,000,000 after. Ooh. Yeah, okay, one more. This one is the easiest one because it's the smallest. I also don't have it memorized. Boom, there we go, time. And inside, little crisp $5 bill. I always give this to the kids and bring it to competitions, whatever. And the rule is if they can complete it in under 5 minutes, they get the $5. All right, so that's what's in my gym bag. Bungees, lacrosse ball would be the first two things that I'd recommend. The bungees you can just pick up. I got mine off of Amazon. I don't think they were too expensive. And I like these ones because they came with a bunch of different tensions. So you can just swap out different bungees or multiply the bungees, add a few of them together if you need a little bit more tension. Really like that for doing a lot of mobility and stimulation work for the shoulders. So great tool. All right, so around me, you'll see the tools for a good warm-up. We got a medicine ball. Med ball I like to use for SMR, self-myofascial release, or soft tissue work. Lacrosse ball for the same thing. Bungees, I use those for mobility, and then I also use them for stimulation. And then the barbell, that one I also use for SMR. So let's talk about SMR first. What I like to do at the start of every single training session is spend about 5 to 10 minutes doing soft tissue work. The reason for this is twofold. Number one, it's gonna start to promote a little bit of blood flow and tell your body to wake up those muscles that you're about to use. Number two, it's gonna help open up your range of motion, which is really, really important. It's kind of a way to cheat the system. If you start by opening up the tissues a little bit, by working through a range of motion and softening everything up, not only are you gonna get more mobility in the body almost immediately, but you're also gonna help to keep the muscles so they don't get so tight. So what I noticed is when I stopped doing the 5 to 10 minutes of SMR at the start of my training sessions is my joints would start to hurt a lot more. Something like jumping up on rings, if your biceps are tight, it's gonna start to pull on the elbow. So what I like to do before heavy ring days or before I'm doing anything where I'm going into extension, like for a mana or like for a muscle up, I really make sure that I roll out the bicep and I work through the anterior delt with internal and external rotation with the barbell pressing into the shoulder. And what that does is it alleviates a lot of the tension that I get on the elbow when I'm locked out on the rings or when I'm pushing into a mana. So the more we can open up the joints a little bit by using SMR, the easier it's gonna be to get to end range and the less tension you're gonna have on your joints because the muscles are looser because of it. So 5 to 10 minutes at the start. This is really personalized for what you guys think you need to do. And you can also individualize it even further depending on what you're doing in the training session. So notice I mentioned I do different SMR depending on the training session that I'm gonna do. If I'm doing legs, I'm gonna use the med ball. I'm gonna roll out the legs with it, the glutes, the IT bands, the quads. If I'm doing a more upper body dominant day, I'm gonna be rolling out the pecs, I'm gonna be rolling out the delts, I'm gonna be rolling out the lats and the traps. So know where you guys are tight. If you do have any problem areas, this is a good time to spend some time opening it up. And then this is also a good time to try to specify on, hey, are we working on handstands today? Do we need full flexion? Do I need to open up the anterior delts and the pec and the lat a bunch? Jump in, do about 5 minutes. It's gonna be really, really helpful. The reason why I like the med ball is it's quite hard. Notice that this one's pretty small. You can kind of compare it to the size of the lacrosse ball I have here. Usually, even if I'm in a gym, I try to find the smallest one I can and the hardest one I can. Reason for this is just gonna put more pressure onto the tissue, which is a good thing. I find that using a foam roller is just too soft and it doesn't do enough work to actually open up the tissue. This works much better and you can manipulate it a lot easier and get into spots and get into areas that otherwise you wouldn't be able to get to with just the foam roller itself. Set up here with the med ball. First thing I'm gonna do is just open up the thoracic spine a little bit. So ball on the ground, gonna lay down, ball kind of on the middle of the back, and then I reach overhead. Usually this gives you a couple good cracks in the back, which is nice. You can move the arms around a little bit. So just really trying to get extension of the spine to begin. Opening that up, making sure we're feeling good there. Opening up the shoulders a little bit. Just kind of exploring and seeing how the body feels. Now, once I'm done with that one, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna attack the traps a little bit. Really important to open these guys up. You use them a ton during handstands, and you wanna try to open that spot up so the scapula can move a little bit better. So, it goes over to the side, right onto the trap. I'm gonna grab my arm and roll up and down the trap and try to find where it feels tight. Spend some time there. Again, pulling the arm across, trying to open up the scapula so I can really get into the traps as best as I can. Rolling forwards and backwards. Not trying to do too much, but we're trying to be consistent with this. 5 to 10 minutes at the start of every session. Seeing where it feels tight. And the other problem is if you do too much, you end up getting a little bit tired, which is what we don't want before we're jumping into a strength session. And that's the thing with this one. You just kind of want to explore around, see where it feels tight, do a little bit of work to open up those tissues. The other thing you can do is you can lift the arm overhead. It's going to give you a little bit of a different feel. This one I like to get the top a little bit more, top of the trap. Once I'm done there, I'm going to get into the lats a little bit. So this one, again, with a foam roller, you can do this, it just doesn't work quite as well and you're a lot more limited, especially on the back. You're not gonna get the same amount of intensity with a foam roller by just laying on your back and rolling forward and backwards, unless you got one of those hard plastic ones with the spikes on it. Those are really good, but maybe save that for after your session. Right now, all we're trying to do is promote that blood flow and get through a little bit more of a range of motion. So, got it on the lat now, arm up, and I'm gonna move side to side, rotating my upper body so that it's rolling kind of from the lat even onto the rear delts a little bit and then right into the armpit. Trying to keep my arm extended, nice and close to the ear. I'm just exploring, seeing where it feels tight, moving around, gonna jump onto that rear delt a little bit, see where it feels tight. And the last part that I'm gonna show you guys today for the upper body specifically is just rolling out the pec and the anterior delts a little bit. So for this one, we're starting ball on the ground again. I'm gonna go arm behind the back for this one. I'm gonna start by just moving around that pec all the way towards the sternum and then all the way out towards the delt. Moving around up and down, side to side, exploring there, opening up the meat of the muscle. Once that's feeling pretty good, now we wanna add that movement of the arm. Arm starts behind the back and I'm gonna move all the way through up until my arm gets overhead. And I'm just gonna keep moving that ball around the pec, all the way over, almost onto the anterior delt there. Keep moving through that range of motion. Explore, see where it feels tight. The one I really like to do that helps out with the handstands, get it closer to the delt, arm bent, and then press up into the overhead position and work through almost kind of like where the shoulder connects with the chest. Then you can also do some internal, external rotation here. A little bit more focused on the anterior delt. But I always find right in here, so not quite on the delt, but right at the edge is where I always get super tight. And that's another one that I like to do with the barbell is I put it in the same area, laying on the back. This one you guys can just go on YouTube. If you want more SMR stuff, Kelly Starrett has more than enough mobility work. He has his, I believe, Ready State that he just released. So if you guys want to jump into more SMR and learn more about it, I highly recommend going and checking out the Ready State, or just go on YouTube. You can search Kelly Starrett, search whatever body part, and he'll have a bunch of really good videos of different ideas of things that you can do. Again, about 5 to 10 minutes, explore a little bit, see where you feel tight. Even after those 5 to 10 minutes, I can feel that I'm getting a little bit warmer. The blood flow has started, which is really good. My muscles feel a lot more awake. I feel a lot more limber and mobile and loose after this than I did before. So that's the goal here. Loosen up the tissues a little bit. Make sure that you're getting all the way to end range, moving through, exploring around, opening up the tissues so that when we get into that mobility work, your joints aren't aching and you can get to end range a lot easier. Speaking of which, let's jump into part number 2, which is working on flexibility and mobility. I always like to start with my wrists. Really important that we're taking care of the wrists. We want them to be flexible and we want that joint to be really, really strong so that when we're getting onto the equipment, when we're doing handstands, when we're hanging on rings, when we're hanging on the bars, we're not worrying too much about tension in the wrist. That was one of the biggest things that I noticed earlier on when I started doing gymnastics training, was my wrists always got really sore from doing handstand work. And even to this day, once you're beyond a minute or working up to a minute, the forearms just start to burn. So if we can add some strength and if we can add some mobility in the wrists, it makes the handstand a lot easier. Something like a muscle up, when you need that wrist to be in a flex position, it also makes it a lot easier to hang on to the rings with the false grip happening. But we can talk about that a little bit more in detail in another video. Wrist stretching. We're on the hands and knees here. And all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna walk around a little bit. Fingers forwards, leaning forwards over the hands. What we want to try to do is we want to try to get the wrists into as many different positions as we can and add some motion so that we're opening up and trying to get to that end range again. I'm going to flip them all the way backwards. Now we've got a little bit of rotation happening. Still extending. And then turning them all the way inside. Both end range of rotation. We're going upside down as well. Hands facing backwards, really sitting back, always making sure that the elbows stay straight. How far can you get? If you need less pressure, bring the knees closer to the hands. You need some more pressure, you bring them farther away, or you try to get more of an angle on that wrist there. Try to open up that range of motion. You can move them around again, flip them back over. Spend a little bit of time there walking around, making sure those wrists feel good and lubricated. Bungee time. This is my absolute favorite tool for warming up, just because you can move through such a gigantic range of motion. They give you a nice progressive tension on the bungees. And again, if you pick up the ones that I got, you can swap out the different tensions. So starting with a little bit of mobility work, I attach the bungee overhead on the stall bars. There's actually a little bar at the top that's not flush here. It sticks out a couple inches. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna work from flexion into extension. I like to do this first with the bungees. Another really good exercise that I like to do that opens up the shoulders as well is doing something like a dowel dislocate. And this one I like to do earlier on, just to make sure that the shoulders are warmed up first before I'm actually putting weight on a bar and using something that's stiff. I'm gonna drop down onto my knees. And here, I'm gonna aim for about 12 reps, trying to keep the hands as close together as I can. And I really feel my traps squeezing together as the shoulders roll through. We're here, shoulder flexion, rolling through to shoulder extension. 1, 2, all the way to 12. The motion is happening by me pulling my traps together, retracting the scapula. The next thing I'm gonna do, straight arm pulling. So I'm gonna start to stimulate some of the movement patterns that I'm doing in my practice. A couple of the things I'm gonna be doing today are front lever I'm going to be doing some rope climbs today, which is bent arm move. But what I want to do is I want to warm up different planes of pulling. So number one is a front lever pull. I'm going to do 6 reps, really focusing on that execution. If you guys remember the mental component, really want to be thinking about the correct movements and feeling what muscles we're turning on. And then once you get to your front lever work or to whatever specific work that you're doing, that movement pattern should already be there. So when we're stimulating these patterns, it's really important to be present and to be focused on where we're pulling from. So this is our cross pull now. And then I usually hang out in the cross position, really trying to squeeze the biceps, the triceps, the lats, pulling those hands wide and down. Do a little bit of rotation here. And this is more prep work to get the elbows ready for harder ring work down the road. So a lot of the stuff that I incorporate is making sure that the elbows are thoroughly warmed up and the shoulders are thoroughly warmed up and the rotator cuff is thoroughly warmed up. And I try to progressively build tension and strength so that when I'm doing harder ring work later down the road, that's not going to be the thing that's going to fail. Now, don't mistake this for strength work. This is positional, and to a certain extent, this is a little bit of mobility because we're working to end range as we're doing these moves, and then also stimulating movement patterns that we're going to be using in the practice. So we did a little bit of straight arm pulling. I'm going to show you a little bit of the straight arm pressing work that I do. I'm going to move the bungee now about head height. Sometimes I drop it down so it's like chin or chest height. Today we're going about eye level on the bar there. Really good to make sure that these are always lined up perfectly so you're not putting more tension through one arm than the other. So I'm walking away from the bars, and what I'm going to perform is just some forward circles, making the circles as big as I can. So I'm warming up the shoulders through the range of motion here. So all the way back, big circle, again about 6 to 12 reps. We want to feel shoulders retracting at the back, and then I'm elevating at the top, trying to get my shoulders all the way to the ears. Also making sure that the belly and the bum stay tight and tucked in. Next one, back lever to planche presses and a little bit of Maltese work. Shoulders starting retracted, down, putting some tension through the biceps here, and then I'm pushing through, keeping the elbows locked. As we come forward, shoulders start to protract, and as we come back, they start to open up. And then I'll drop into the Maltese, move around a little bit, feeling the biceps turning on, feeling the shoulders turning on, feeling those lats turning on, everything tight, shoulders pulling down. Now that we got some straight arm pulling and some straight arm pushing in, gonna work on the wrists a little bit more. I try to choose exercises that are the biggest bang for the buck, where I don't have to do 100 things, but 10 things that just work really well. So this is for the wrists, and this is also gonna help to further warm up the elbows in the bent arm position. Let's jump into the exercises. First one is going to be a wrist push-up. The way to scale these ones is just to move your knees, and once you get strong enough, we're taking them to the feet. So if you're starting here with the knees nice and close, and then slowly moving them back to put more tension on the hands, till you're getting to a position where you have no pike in the hips are open, your butt is tucked under, and your belly is tucked in. Once you're there, then we can start to bring it all the way up into a front support. So first one is the wrist push-up. We're on the knuckles here. As I come down, as the wrists bend, I'm gonna bend the elbows all the way down, nose close to the floor, back up, rolling back onto the knuckles. Not trying to go too fast, not trying to hop onto my knuckles, but really trying to roll off of the back of the wrist. After I'm done there, I just like to stretch out the shoulders between the sets a little bit. So, got the wrist done, arms overhead, opening up the shoulders, opening up the lats a little bit. Here, you can do one arm at a time. You can do both arms, cat stretch position. I'm gonna go back onto my hands again. This time, fingers facing forwards. Hands are nice and wide, palms are flat. It's gonna be a push-up again, and as I come off the floor, I'm gonna lift the palms off the floor. Goal being to get the wrist perfectly straight, not to have any pike in the wrist. Again, 6 reps here. Front support, making sure the bum and the belly are tight. Push up and lift in the palms. Back down, stretching out the shoulders again. Next one, making a fist, knuckles on the floor. I'm gonna do some rocks here. Support position again, not forgetting about position, making sure my butt's tight, my belly's on. Rock forwards onto the first knuckle, and then onto the pinky. A little bit of bend in the arms in the back, elbows straight in the front. For the shoulder stretching now, I'm actually gonna flip the hands upside down, palms facing up. Get the stretch in a little bit of a different place. Last one. Fingers are together, hands are forwards. Back into the sport position, making sure my shape is good. This is gonna be a push-up onto the fingertips here. A little bit of seal stretch to finish. And now we have a little bit of stimulation in the wrists, in the elbows. Again, we're not forgetting about body position here. Really trying to think and be present towards what our body's doing. The more focus we have here, it's gonna mean we're gonna have a much more successful training session. You can use the bungees for the wrists, and I like to alternate between doing exercises on the floor and exercises with the bungees just to take the tension off a little bit more. And again, using that progressive range of motion that you get from the bungees. So work on some flexion exercises, really trying to curl those wrists under. Again, just aiming for about 6 reps. Not trying to strengthen too much, just trying to warm them up. And as we move on, if we're doing this consistently, the strength will come. Much better to aim for about 5 every day than it would be to do 5 sets of 5 once a week. Same thing with extension. Next one that we want to do is we want to do some rotations. Elbows are staying tucked in. The bungees coming through the top near the thumb here, and then I'm rotating the wrists out. Same thing, just with the bungee underneath, coming by the pinky, palms start up, rotating the palms down. And the last one that we can do is some rotations of the wrist. I'm gonna grab on again, bungee coming out by my index finger, hands in front, and then rotating the wrists upwards. Same thing, other direction. Bands are coming out now beside the pinkies, pulling them back. All right, with the wrists taken care of, we're back over to the wall bars again with the bungees. A little bit more pulling stuff here and a little bit more rotational stuff here for the shoulders. So gonna start with some extension pulls. Bungee wrapped around this one, chin or kind of face height, facing away from the bars now. Pulling the arms behind. Really trying to work into extension of the shoulder. Next one, I like to drop the bungee down a little bit further. Maybe about waist height on this one. And then we're gonna do some external rotations. Starting with the elbows pulled back, traps squeezing together in the back, scapula pulled together, and then just rotating and pulling the hands up. Next one for a little bit of bent arm warm up. So we did the wrists and the bent arm pushing. Now we're gonna do a little bit more wrists, and this one's gonna be bent arm pull. We're jumping up on the rope, and on this one I like to do slow eccentrics on the way down. If we're not quite at this level, you can find another bent arm exercise. Something like a pull-up would work really well. Ropes are kind of optional. I've mastered rope climbs. I've done a ton of them. I can do them with weight, and I can do multiples in a row. So I include the rope climb as part of my warm-up. Again, try not to forget about position as we climb the rope here. Gonna keep the legs in a nice straddle on the way up, trying to keep the feet about the same height as the hips. And on the way down, about three 3-second eccentrics on each arm. So most often when I'm performing warm-up, or if I'm looking at something like flexibility, I try to focus on gaining mobility. So a really important distinction between the two. Flexibility is more passive. How far can you get to end range? So when we look at flexibility, we're sitting in a position, maybe showing how far can we get into something like a pike. When we look at mobility, it's how far can we pull ourselves into that same position? How close can you bring your legs into your stomach rather than trying to flatten yourself out or have someone push you into the position? If you work on mobility, if you work on strength through the entire range of motion, not only will it help the joints to make sure that you're staying safe and preventing injury, but it'll also help increase the flexibility. So I typically don't do a whole lot of flexibility work where I'm sitting in a stretch for 30 seconds or longer. Most of what I'm doing is moving through range of motion with strength. So One that I like to do for the shoulders is the dislocate. I use weight on this one, going 10 pounds on the bar for me, but for this, what you wanna do is you wanna build up really slowly. Don't try to get there in one day. This has been 3 years of work for me, starting with something like a bungee until I was able to get my hands close, maybe 1 or 2 grips outside of shoulder width. Once we're there with the bungee, then we can work on something like a dowel, making sure that we're doing both a dislocate and an inlocate. And then once we're good and we're getting those hands again, 1 or 2 grips away from shoulder width, then we can start putting weight onto the bar. So this one, again, just aiming for 6 reps, trying to be consistent with these exercises and trying to progress day to day. Even if it's a little millimeter, even if it's a kilo on the bar, progress is progress. This stuff we're not trying to rush. Set your ego aside at the door, come in and make sure you're working on the right movement patterns, working to end range and getting there nice and slow. So here, I like to think not about moving my hands in a circle, but I like to think about moving my shoulders in a circle. Arms in front, protracting on the way up, elevation at the top, and then retraction on the way down. Making sure that the shape doesn't change and it's the shoulders doing the work. All right, last one here, and this one's for the legs specifically. My absolute favorite go-to exercise for opening up the hips and making sure I have range of motion in the ankle. Gonna be doing a Cossack squat. This one you don't have to do with weight. Again, I've built up slowly over time so that, again, just aiming for 5 or 6 reps every single day. And then as we get stronger and as the movement becomes more proficient, we slowly begin to add weight to it. So I'm using a barbell here. Feel free to use no weight or something a little bit lighter. Holding a dumbbell in the front rack is a good place to start. Keeping the body upright, making sure we're bending the leg and sitting the bum all the way down. The goal is to get the bum nice and close to the heel and making sure the knee is pushing out. We don't want that knee in, we want to push that knee out. Straight up with the chest, making sure the butt doesn't rise before the shoulders. Spending a little bit of time at the bottom, moving through, opening up the hip joint, as well as the ankle. So as you guys know, the right ankle for me, I have that torn ligament, so I usually spend a little bit more time on the right side, making sure that I can get flexion on that side. As you can see here, if I just do a quick little test, much easier to attain flexion on the right ankle. This one just stops. So I usually spend a little bit more time opening up this side. Likewise with you guys, if you notice that anything is a little tight, harder to get into, this is when we want to spend time on opening it up, as it's going to affect the strength session that we're about to do or the training practice that we're about to perform. If anything feels tight or if you feel limited by something in your range of motion, it's going to hold you back from attaining certain skills, and it's going to hold you back in your practice, whether that's attaining strength or whether that's attaining skill. So spend the time in your warm-up to make sure that you have full range of motion, and then the strength and the skill will come a lot faster. All right, and that is a wrap for the warm-up. So aim for about 15 to 30 minutes to get through everything, depending on how much time you have and depending on what your training needs actually are. Spend the first 5 to 10 minutes working on some tissue work, making sure you're getting to end range, working on any of those problem areas, and trying to open up the tissues as best as you can. Again, that's going to start to promote blood flow as well. Go through some straight arm pressing, some straight arm pulling, a little bit of bent arm pushing, and a little bit of bent arm pulling. And then once you guys get into your training session, you're going to be nice and lubricated. Hopefully you worked up to full range of motion. Again, don't try to get there in one day. Much better to do a set of 5 or a set of 6 or a set of 10 every single day than it would be to do it 7 sets of 10 just once a week. Progress slowly, find exercises that work for you, figure out where your problem areas are, and cater it to your training session. If you know you're going to be working on handstands, you know you need to have flexion, spend time making sure you can get into a good overhead position. Then when you get onto your hands, you're going to find that handstand is going to be much easier to do. If you're doing something like a planche and you want to have nice protraction of the shoulders, jump in, do some of that straight arm pushing work. Get those shoulders into protraction, even on the hands, working on some scap shrugs, whatever you need to do to mobilize that scapula to make sure that you can get into a protracted position. Build strength as you're doing this. I highly recommend focusing on mobility, working through full range of motion under load, full range of motion with strength. Something like that dowel dislocate that I showed you, any of that bungee work that I showed you, you're going to be stimulating the movement pattern, and then you're also going to be getting to end range. Really important that you're doing that stuff if you want to prepare for harder ring work, or if you want to just make sure that your joints are staying healthy and that you're not getting injured. And again, make sure that you guys are staying really focused and really present with execution of your basics in your warm-up, whether it is strength focused or whether it is skill focused. Something as small as the difference between this leg and that leg, or even that leg and that leg, it's gonna have an impact. So when you have the opportunity to work on making sure a position is correct, make sure it is correct. Make sure it's done properly. Don't rush through it, because then when you're applying that same type of movement, that same position in something else that you're doing, you're not gonna have to think as hard about, oh yeah, I gotta keep my legs super straight. If an athlete is going up on the high bar and they're performing giants and they did some hollow body rocks in their warm-up to prepare the shapes, maybe some arch rocks in the warm-up to prepare the arch shape as well, but they performed it with bent legs, or they're losing tension somewhere in their body, or the position is a little bit off, we're probably gonna see the same thing reflected on that high bar turn when they're swinging around the bar. And if you don't understand the positions properly, that's okay. As you learn and as you grow, you need to be keeping those things in mind and writing down notes when you feel, oh, that felt like a really good set. Write down why it felt good, and then you'll become more connected to that certain position. And then incorporate those same cues and the same things that you learned, incorporate that in your warm-up. Remember what felt good and why it felt good. Put it into your warm-up and try to simulate that as many times as you can, so you're not thinking about it when you're doing the big skill. So that's the mental side of things. Hopefully I covered the physical side enough for you guys today. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to get back to all the questions that you have. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. I'm gonna be releasing one video per week, and we're gonna talk everything gymnastic strength and performance related. All the best, guys. Hopefully this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video. This isn't part of my warm-up, just so you guys know. Passes the time. Eventually, I wanna be able to do this with my eyes closed. I think that'd be pretty wicked. Just to be able to do it by feel without looking at it.